So I know I had made that whole video talking about how I was kind of considering giving up these whole game reviews, just not doing them anymore. But the thing is, going into this year, we already suspected that Nintendo would announce a successor to the Switch at any moment, and at this point, it has officially happened. So the thing is, there's a very good chance this will be the last year we get any Switch games. It may go into 2025 somewhat, but it's probably gonna be the last year, the last full year of Switch before Nintendo moves on to their next console. So I may as well, just do some quick rambly videos on the games I play this year. So that way I'll have a video for every year of the Switch's lifespan. I'm not sure if I'm going to do this all as one video, or I'm going to just split it up into smaller videos, but I've played 3 games so far, currently working on my 4th, and so I'm just going to talk about them. And the very first game I played this year is Splatoon 3 Side Order. So technically not a game, a DLC expansion. But still, it's a single-player campaign. It's different enough from the main game of Splatoon 3, I feel like it counts. So, I don't know if the term is roguelike or roguelite, and I don't feel like looking it up right now, sorry. But when I first heard that Splatoon 3 Side Order would be a roguelike, there were 2 main concerns, really, that it could go one of 2 ways. Either the game would be too easy, or it would be absolutely brutally difficult. I was afraid of this being Octo expansion level difficulty, but also I didn't want it to be something too easy that I could do in a single sitting. So in Splatoon 3 Side Order, you find yourself at a place called the Spire of Order, which you have to climb again and again until you can finally beat its main boss waiting at the top. There are 30 floors, which feels like a fair amount to me. The worry is that it either goes way too many floors up or, not enough floors. But 30 is a happy medium where I don't feel like it takes too long, but it also is worth the price that I paid. Each time you go in, you have pallets, I think 11 or so, of Splatoon's differing weapons, and each pallet also has a different sub or special weapon, so very similar to the base game's kit system. However, you can also find vending machines while climbing the spire to exchange some membucks, a currency you get within the spire, for subs or specials, or color chips, which we'll get to in a second. So if you don't like a pallet's kit, you can customize it, you just have to get to a vending machine to do so. One small detail I do like about the pallets is that they actually belong to specific characters. They're built from their memories. So for example, Marie's pallet has a charger and Callie's has a roller. So you actually get to see what different characters' preferred weapon would be. And seeing their kit layout is also just a nice way to add some more depth of characters that you wouldn't get to see through dialogue, since you never really get to see them fight in the story itself. Now, as you're climbing the tower, each floor has a different challenge. There are, I think, 5 different challenges to choose from, and each floor is going to be a different challenge on a different type of floor, so there's a whole variety. I don't think I've even seen all of them myself. After each floor you beat, you go up the next floor, and you get to pick a new color chip. Color chips are this game's main upgrade. They come in varieties like power or range or drone. In this mode, you have Pearl as a drone to guide you, and as you upgrade her, she can actually fight for you. She can also let you glide. So for example, the color chip may increase your firing rate, or it may increase your damage, or it could give Pearl a new ability, for example, throwing a splat bomb. Now, you can just get one of different types of color chips to build up your palette, or you can actually go for multiple types of one color chip, which will actually increase that stat that much more. For example, you can get one color chip to up your fire rate a little bit, or you can get like 5 firing rate chips to essentially become a handheld machine gun. To me, the color chip system is maybe the main appeal of this mode, because you can go and do a wide variety of different color chips to try and, somewhat balance out your character, or you can go for one specific type of color chip and just make yourself absolutely broken in that specific area. For example, at one point I had a whole bunch of different chips that prevented me from losing ink or made me regain ink super fast. And so I had an ink brush that just never ran out of ink. Whether I was holding it down to run faster or just, slapping it everywhere to kill enemies, I never had to refill whatsoever. That's still one of my favorite builds to this day. The game actually expects you to beat it with every single type of palette, which would sound tedious, but the thing is, this was a mode that was designed to be played again and again, and playing it with different types of weapons already makes it a completely different experience. And even then, depending on what route you go with your color chip can make it a totally different experience from there. You can have a run with the charger that's absolutely brutal, or you can have a run with a charger that makes you the most broken thing in the game. Thankfully, every time you climb the spire, you get pearls, which you can use for permanent hacks. But you can also turn these hacks off if you don't want to use them later. And I'm very thankful for this change because, when combined with the hack system, I feel like the difficulty here is perfect. Without any hacks, you're gonna have a really tough time. But with hacks, you could make it too easy. So the nice thing is, you can turn off hacks that you buy. You can easily adjust them to whatever level you want, up to the maximum of however much you paid for. For example, if you up your damage, I think there are 5 or so upgrades for that. So you can do a maximum of 5, or you can go somewhere in the middle to do 3. Or if you want, you could go down to 0 and have no damage up upgrades. All this makes for an experience that can be whatever you want. You can either make it really challenging on yourself, or you can just try to be as ridiculously broken as possible, which to me is the more fun option. And as with anything Splatoon, the details are wonderful. I love how many different musical nods there are in this game, from the enemies having names based on musical elements to being able to play music from the color chips you get. And I'm really happy to see 8 back. This is kind of a bigger discussion to have, but I worry about Splatoon continuously introducing new player characters because you never really get to see the old ones. We already have people who are upset that you don't get to see Agent 4, period, in Splatoon 3. So, as the games go on, we get more and more. If we keep deciding that the player is a new person every single time, eventually people are gonna miss out on past player characters more and more. And 8 was already probably easily the best written Splatoon agent. So I'm really happy to have them back as a player character rather than introducing a new one. But I do have a few complaints. Every palette has a first and second preferred color tone, meaning when you pick that palette, you're gonna get more of that tone than anything else. For example, Rollers is power. But the issue is, even after you've cleared the Spire of Order with every single palette, you don't get the option to adjust that. It's just permanently baked into every single weapon. And I think, once you've beaten it with every single palette, I don't really see why you shouldn't be able to adjust that. I think it'd be fun if they let you, so that you could really just aim to make it as easy on yourself as possible to get whatever form of a broken or ridiculously inefficient weapon you want based on color chips. And yeah, I'm not going to 100% this game because that would require getting the maximum of every kind of color chip. And there are some color chips that aren't in the preferred tone for a palette, meaning it's really difficult to get it to show up. and you have to get it to show up 5 times within a run to 100% that color chip. My main complaint though is with the story. It's not necessarily terrible, but there's just not really much to it. I really love Splatoon story modes for the story, for how they expand the world and everything. And unfortunately, with this being a roguelike, they can't really do much because they don't know how far you're going to get every time. There's a possibility you could beat this thing first try. And so because of that, you don't really get many major revelations in this one. And the final boss also isn't really anything super interesting. It's kind of basic. You have a tutorial spire that you have to climb. That's only 10 floors, and after you do that, it pretty much just tells you everything and explains away all of the mystery. You do have Marina's devlogs, which you unlock by using more weapons, and every time you clear a 10th floor or a new boss with a new weapon, you get a key, up to 3 keys per weapon, and that unlocks more palettes / Marina Dev Diaries / pearls. And Marina's Dev Diaries are nice. They kind of explain the backstory a bit better, and eventually go into some details you don't get into. And also, as you play the game more, there are little conversations in the elevator that do reveal some small things, and add a little bit more to the final boss's character. But overall, it's still not as complex as past Splatoon storylines. It's not really the biggest deal, it doesn't ruin the game or anything like that, but I do wish they could have squeezed story into it a bit more somehow. You know, maybe every 10 floors you get like a little area where you walk around and that reveals more about the story. I don't know, it's difficult to tell a story with a roguelike, clearly. So I guess that's one area where I would say the roguelike genre is slightly holding it back, but as a whole, I still think it was the right way to go for this DLC. They absolutely succeeded in making a mode that is fun to do over and over again, with different weapons, and make it so that even using the same weapon, even using the same whole palette without changing the sub or special, it can feel completely different on different runs. And while I'm on the topic of Splatoon 3, unrelated to Side Order, I feel like it might be time for me to update my review of the game a bit. I had previously called this the best Splatoon game, and I think I'm at a point where I can rescind that statement, especially now that we're entering what would appear to be the final major update, the final season of the game. I do think this is the best Splatoon game mechanically. The squid roll and the new movement tech, as well as just how everything feels, is the best it's ever been. But it's really, everything comes back to the stage design. And it has gotten better in new stages, but unfortunately, so many of the old stages, including Splatoon 1 and 2 stages that were changed in this version, have just been downgraded so much. And new stages, up until a certain point, really weren't adding anything new. I'm also very much not a fan of this season way of releasing content. It just makes every update feel smaller, ironically, because the point is it's supposed to make every update feel bigger. It's supposed to make it so that every time you log on and it's a new season, you have 3 months worth of new content to look forward to. But the catalog system that basically forces you to play every day or grind a lot just makes me sick of the game instead of actually enjoying it, because I'm not picking up the game because I want to play it every time. I'm picking up the game because I have to get my catalog bonus for the day. Deep Cut has grown on me in recent months. I've definitely said some stupid things on Twitter after certain Splatfests, in the heat of the moment, but I like the general dynamic. I still feel like they really messed up in taking so long to give them stage-specific dialogue, because Deep Cut as a whole just doesn't feel as unique as the other groups. I don't feel like they have so much going for them. They've gotten more with the new dialogue, but because we didn't have that for something like 6 to 9 months, they just felt like flat characters that entire time. And by the time they added more dialogue to expand their characters, it was kind of already past the point where I was wanting to learn about them. At this point, I usually just skip the news right away because I'm used to them not having anything interesting to say, even though now they kind of do. Mainly, I just think that Deep Cut didn't really get involved in the lore at all. Like, they were involved in the story mode as bosses, and that's a really cool way to flesh out your character. But then that's all we see of them. We never learn about Shiver Shark. We never learn about Fry's Eels. We never learn anything about Big Man as Manta or his Manta culture. I think there's barely even been anything in dev interviews that I've seen. And going back to the stages, I think they kind of blend into that. Not just like the design, but they don't feel like real places. Even past stages feel less real than they did before in Splatoon 1 or even 2. The stages feel like they're there for, your Inklings to fight on. They don't feel like they're there because they're natural locations that exist that the Inklings choose to turf for or do ranked battles in. And I think the whole deep cut thing leads into that larger point I briefly mentioned. I still don't want to go super into detail, but I'm really hoping Splatoon 4 doesn't introduce a new idol group as well. I'm expecting it, but I'm not hoping for it. I feel like we can do plenty with the idols we have now, and the way Deep Cut was treated in this game, I kind of feel like the team is maybe running out of ideas for the idols already, and I would much rather see them expand on the personalities and characters we already have, rather than trying to come up with new ones simply because that's the tradition for a Splatoon game. I want to see Callie, Marie, Pearl and Marina, Shiver, Fry, and Big Man expanded on instead of introducing new characters. And unfortunately, I think it's too late for the game to really be saved, and Nintendo doesn't really seem interested in saving it anyway. It seems like with everything I've seen from this new catalog and everything, they are fully planning on this being the final season and not really extending it past here. And if they do extend it, it's probably just going to be, more weapons. It's really disappointing that the final few updates just had a single stage. For a long while, we were expecting the game to pick up after Side Order released. It seemed like, maybe these updates weren't quite as big as we were hoping because they were working on Side Order. But then Side Order came out, and the updates since have been smaller. We've gotten less new stages each season, these final few. And at this point, I think we just saw our final new stage. And that's just really disappointing, especially with the state of so many of the other ones. It feels weird to rant against this game because I still enjoy it. I still really love Splatoon in general, and this game is no exception. But I just feel like Nintendo definitely fumbled the bag with what they could have done with this one. They introduced a whole new city and then barely told us anything about it, really. The stages feel stale. I don't feel like they tell us more about Splatsville as its place and its surrounding areas. They just sort of exist for battles. Side Order is awesome, and so far I think it's my game of the year. I'm currently playing the Thousand Year Door, so we'll see if that changes things. Originally, that was going to be the end of the Splatoon 3/Side Order segment, but as this segment has gone on so long, and I've had an epiphany which will require further discussion on Side Order, I've decided that Splatoon is going to get its own video. I believe for a while now that Octo Expansion is good enough to be sold as its own game, that it should get a physical retail release. I've actually wanted to allow friends to play it without having to spend $80 buying Splatoon 2 and Octo Expansion together. But what Side Order made me realize is that while I do think a physical release would be a great option for the game, it actually wouldn't be the definitive way to play it. Octo Expansion
is at its best as a Splatoon 2 DLC. When Off the Hook was first revealed, it wasn't just exciting that we had new idols. It was exciting that one of them was an Octoling. That raised so many questions at the time for the relationship between Inklings and Octolings, for where the story would go, for who is she, why is she here? Marina represented a lot more than just who she specifically was as a character. And same thing for Pearl, that this Inkling was friends, and in fact, best friends and band partners with an Octoling, said so much about what Splatoon 2 was going to do. When Splatoon 2 launched, Pearl and Marina didn't have any role in the story, aside from maybe some cameo appearances in some Sucking Scrolls. And I actually think this worked out to their benefit, because before the reveal and eventual release of Octo Expansion, we were just left with these questions for so long. In the meantime, we got to know them as characters, but we still just wanted to know, how was Marina here and what did that mean? So when Octo Expansion finally did release, and it finally did reveal their backstory, alongside just expand their characters in general, it just felt so much more satisfying getting to know the backstory of characters we already knew, rather than ones we were just meeting. And the final reward of giving the player a playable Octoling isn't just really exciting as a reward, it also advances the game's lore, even for players without Octo Expansion. Because those players would still be seeing Octolings in their lobby, it implies that Octo Expansion is canon whether you have it or not, something a lot of game DLCs don't do. Obviously, the fantastic single-player gameplay of Octo Expansion is the main draw, but everything it does in expanding characters, advancing the world's lore, answering unanswered questions, it all makes it so much more impactful when it is attached to Splatoon 2. But the reason Side Order made me realize this is because for Splatoon 3, it isn't. Deep Cut is maybe the biggest example. The idols of each game are the representatives of their area and era for us. They are how we come to understand the world, through them. So, with Splatsville being this completely different area, miles and miles apart from Inkopolis, and having a completely different culture where seemingly Inklings and Octolings live in harmony, where there was never this divide that there was in Inkopolis, that should have massive implications on the Splatoon world. And then there's Big Man, who is an entirely different species. That should be huge. And before Side Order, Deep Cut was arguably in an even better position than Off the Hook before Octo Expansion, because of their usage as bosses in Splatoon 3's main single-player campaign. The boss fights show us a little bit more about them that we don't get to know through dialogue, and then we would have had those months and months of dialogue to get to know them as characters while pondering about their backstory and what their different cultures are in Splatsville. Instead, they only exist in Side Order as palettes. They get just as much representation as the Squid Sisters, and far less than Off the Hook, but without anything to aid them, without their own focused single-player campaign. And the final reward of unlocking Inkopolis Square as another plaza is cool. It is cool to get to see the square after years with new developments, getting to see Pearl and Marina on stage again, but what does it do for Splatsville? Absolutely nothing. In fact, Inkopolis Square is only a few city blocks from Inkopolis Plaza, like less than a mile, I think, even. So, if there was a train station to Inkopolis Plaza, then a train station to Inkopolis Square isn't that important. It doesn't do much to advance the world at all. The members is cool and could have impacts on the future of the series, but in terms of where it is right now, it doesn't really do anything. All in all, Splatsville is a really cool concept for an area. It's really neat that we get to see a city that isn't Inkopolis, but everything about it is just tell, don't show. We don't really know much about it other than it's supposedly harder to live there than Inkopolis. We don't know anything about the culture of Inklings and Octolings in that society. We don't know anything about manta ray culture in general. All we have are a few tiny sunken scrolls that just give us vague details. And now we're not really gonna get to see it unless Splatoon 4 decides to focus on them. I still think making Octo Expansion its own packaged experience would be cool, but if you were to play Octo Expansion without playing Splatoon 2, you would lose some of what makes Octo Expansion special. If you were to make Side Order its own packaged experience and play Side Order without Splatoon 3, you wouldn't really lose anything. Side Order is perfectly fine on its own because it doesn't really do anything to help Splatoon 3. And I don't really want to use any of these as points against Side Order. I still want Side Order to keep its rank in my 2024 games list because none of these are really Side Order's fault. It's just the game that it's attached to. Side Order, I guess, isn't really Splatoon 3 DLC. It's just a sequel to Octo Expansion. Side Order is kind of a double-edged sword. As a sequel to Octo Expansion, as its own thing, it's great, but it's almost a detriment to the game it's attached to. Even though it does add more value, does add more to Splatoon 3, it doesn't add anything Splatoon 3 related to Splatoon 3. None of this changes how I'm going to rank Side Order itself, but it is important to bring up in the discussion of Splatoon 3 as a whole.